For our study of chapters 15 and a half through 18, you guys get to use the discussion thread to pull out examples from the midway through the diviner section, rainmakers, kings, queens, and rulers. Each of you pulling some quotations out of each of the chapters to pop and refresh our memories of key and interesting elements from the readings. What I'd like to do is try to step back from them to think with you about how, now that we are getting deeper into this ontology, this listing and division and subdivision of the experience of the religious life in African traditional religions, we want to be able to step back as well and think about one of the most important things that the comparative study of religion brings to us. And this is comparative models of personhood. So when you step back and think about it, a religious tradition is not just simply going to provide one with a different set of rituals, but also will literally depict a different model of how the human relates to the creative power of the world. So in this case, here we are back to my model of religious person. Religious person is purposefully depicted here with brown skin, not just because this is an African traditional religions class, but I do this for each and every class in recognition of the predominant and more pigmented flesh of the majority of the world's people. And I try to depict an androgynous character. So there are breasts and there's kind of a dangly part between legs, and that is literally meant to give us a little bit of gender and androgyny, a thought about male and female religious subjectivity, because that is so central to all religious traditions, is the distinctions and the specific roles that are accorded to these two genders, and as well as those characters that then cross genders, and there's every tradition also has addresses those. So above religious person, we have the 4 marks that I put there. On the outer edge here, the mark is thinking about the annual cycles. So those are the 4 seasons. And you think about a liturgical calendar that people move through every year that generally recreates from the creation story to contemporary times, what are the key moments of the tradition, as well as linking into what festivals per season serve as our temporal landmarks for our progression through the years. On the internal side, this is more at the realm of personhood or the human. Then we have birth, puberty, marriage, and death as the 4 key marks on that temporal scale, this temporal scale of a lifetime. And then underneath religious person, an underworld, as well as over here is the cliff of mortality. So that cliff has always got a pressure onto human communities because human life is pretty vulnerable. So with death always pressing in, and with a variety of different cosmologies, some kinds of underworlds are bad or evil, other kinds might be a source of the tree of life, as we have learned about in some of the African traditions. One other point that might be worth your thinking about here and beyond is that there are one way to understand fundamental traditions is that in many ways they close this circle and they create a sphere of belonging, and those which are outside of that sphere are understood to be heretical, in exile, and don't belong. And so where fundamentalism will likely reject and try to maintain a border between those who do and don't belong, other traditions have openings in their horizons whereby it is even sometimes their job to approach and seek out the vulnerable as moral ethic, and welcome religious difference and would welcome multiple horizons. So that's just an interesting way to think about how the cosmology interacts on the earth. Now, let's take a couple steps back. In the Keller introduction to thinking about religion, I described 3 lenses, and those are work, power, and embodied meaning. And the suggestion is that if you take these 3 terms with you as you traipse across to Africa or to Asia or anywhere else, or perhaps even into a religious tradition in your own town that you've never approached before, that if you would use these 3 concepts rather than thinking about what do they believe, that you will get a more accurate depiction and understanding of the religious life. Now, these 3 lenses can be used to look at the broader sociological field of a tradition, so how the tradition functions to govern a community. So you can use those looking at the larger social work of the community, or you can use these same 3 lenses to look at the individual level. And when you do that, you begin to raise a relief map of a model of personhood that is developed in that tradition. So as we narrow our focus in on religious person and how is a person constructed in this tradition, then I want both of those on the page. There we go. That's what I'd like to focus on in thinking about our chapters 15 and a half through 18. So this lecture focuses on the individual. We can look at the work that individuals do, including the work of specialists. We can look at the power or agency of people living in a religious universe, upon which I expand below. And we can understand the practices of everyday life and ritual life, that those embody meanings, producing an internal cognitive symbolic map of personhood. This is an interior landscape in the muscle memory, the knowledge of songs and dances, the engagement with divination, mediums, rainmakers, and the habits of association, who speaks to whom, who dances with whom, who cooks for whom, who prepares altars, all those kinds of things, by which the orienteer navigates across the external landscape of the religious universe. So we've got an internal set of maps, and this mapping process is how humans develop a sense of their subjectivity, their personhood. Now, again, I'm going to take one more step back and think about Chittister. He began with the itinerary. He says that's not sufficient because we don't get the coherent meaning of the system. And he says, let's think of these as symbolic maps, because once we do, we start to demonstrate a coherent system of meaning, how the items in the itinerary are related in a human's meaningful symbolic universe. And to that, then he said, these universes are not static. We want to look how power is at work in each of these symbolic maps. How is that power experienced in daily life? So personhood, then, is an element of social production. It is an achievement. It is not that babies get born and they know what it is to be a person, and as they go through all of these changes, they know what it is to be a person. Rather, personhood is an achievement that requires the work of the entire community, where power is exercised according to hierarchies of gender, age, and status in the community. Now, from Chittister, we received a dynamic map where the spheres of homestead, chiefdom, and sacred specialists, those are our 3 spheres of power. He said you could practically think of them as 3 distinct religions. And that power flows within each of those domains and across the domains. So it should not surprise us that the human also, therefore, can be pictured as a conduit of power, connecting to the spirit realms across the fields of social play. Right? If the religious traditions themselves are dynamic, it shouldn't surprise us that personhood is more like a conduit than a, what we might pull in the word, reified autonomous self, rather than being an individual. So